or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Karen, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 12, 2026 issue of the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, our first article under Viewpoints is Love Thy Neighbor Doesn't Mean What It Once Did in a Small Town America. For more than 2 decades, I, a black woman, lived with my family in a small Illinois town filled with white residents, many with a staunchy fidelity to God, country, and guns. Although I don't live there anymore, it was a delightful place because our family and several others in our small subdivision, particularly the family next door, worked hard to embody the tenet, love thy neighbor. We took baby steps at first, getting to know one another during impromptu barbecues and bonfires. Those moments would lay the groundwork for others to come that were far more consequential and far more meaningful. Lately, I've been thinking, would I even consider living in a conservative small town in today's America? Absolutely not. And that says something painful about what my country has become and my place in it. To understand why we moved there in 1989, back when the town's welcome sign announced a population of 1,000, you must first understand how foundational home ownership and upward mobility are to the American dream. David Trice, my husband-to-be, and I had come of age in the afterglow of the 1960s civil rights gains, believing we could live anywhere we could afford. In 1989, David told me he'd been dreaming about owning acres of land. He asked me to consider moving outside Chicago to the country. I was not keen on leaving my city. Although Chicago had its issues with redlining and massive disinvestment that left generational scars on some primarily black neighborhoods, the small town ethos held little sway over me. We were bubbles, black urban professionals, recent college graduates. We had grown up on Chicago's South Side, he in a beautiful Georgian in the affluent Beverly neighborhood, I in a high-rise in a working-class section of the historic Bronzeville community. As our wedding day approached, we'd made an offer on a century-old fixer-upper, a Greystone in Bronzeville. But the owners were dragging their feet, which afforded David time to browse listings for homes for sale in the country amid cornfields, red barns, and silos. He found a brown brick 2-story that sat on a nearly 3-acre wooded lot at the end of a cul-de-sac. Beyond the house was a pond. We drove the 40 miles outside the city to see the house and fell in love with it. I agreed to move with the caveat that we stay for a year and then reassess. Most of our family members thought we were nuts. Most except my father-in-law, who'd grown up in the Jim Crow South, stealing sips of water from the whites-only fountain, and who, like my own father, had moved to Chicago during the Great Migration. He dreamed of living in the Beverly neighborhood, which when they moved in was predominantly white, or Pill Hill, a well-to-do south side of neighborhood and home to many black doctors. He walked our property with pride. His only caveat, let the police know black folks are in town. Our neighbors had 2 young children, a daughter and a son. The husband was a mechanical engineer, and the wife worked in the administration office of the local Lutheran school. We knew we could have spent years living side by side, barely acknowledging one another, but we dared something different. We had keys to each other's homes, and we looked after each other's property during summer vacations and winter breaks. We attended weddings and funerals and stood in each other's driveway watching the kids go off to prom. David and I were in our house 5 years before we had our daughter. At 14 months, she contracted a brain infection and nearly died. We were in the intensive care unit with her for 10 days, and our total stay in the hospital stretched well beyond a month. During our time away, our neighbors visited us at the hospital, looked after our house, and came over daily to feed and spend time with our cat. You don't have to be religious to understand the value of loving one's neighbor. It shouldn't mandate that we agree politically, but it does suggest that respect and kindness, at the very least, can form the backbone of any community. We sold our house on Election Day in 2016. By then, David and I had been divorced for just over a year. He was living in the city, and I was about to return myself. Months before, I'd watched Trump signs sprout from the lawns of residents who surprised me, but not from our immediate neighbors. With America celebrating its 250th birthday, we seem to be in moral retreat when it comes to loving our neighbors. The message from the leader of the free world is not love thy neighbor, especially if the people next door are a gay family, an immigrant family, a black family, a family with a trans child. We are encouraged to indulge our delusions about replacement theory and white male superiority, and to surrender to our instincts towards incivility and division. America has never been a perfect union, but there was a moment not long ago when we seemed, however imperfectly, to be striving toward a broader idea of who belonged. Our country right now is mired in a level of bullying and intolerance that, for some, might feed their fears but won't feed their family. There's a quote I love from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that comes from his commencement address at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania in 1961, 8 years before America's first lunar landing. King contrasted the country's technological expertise with his moral aptitude. He suggested that we should be as sophisticated, forward-thinking, and progressive in our moral universe as we have been with our gadgetry. Jet planes have compressed into minutes distances that once took days and months to cover. Through our scientific genius, we have made of this world a neighborhood. Now, through our moral and spiritual development, we must make of it a brotherhood. In a real sense, we must all learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will all perish together as fools. In our democratic experiment, our most fundamental duty is to see our neighbors as wholly human. If we can't do that, we lose our grip on who we are as a people and as a nation. Okay, our next article is titled "A Discipline Crisis in Parenting Calls for Fathers." My community advocacy work became much more visible after 5/14, but I've been doing youth work for a long time. Whether it was on the streets in Detroit, the east side of Buffalo, Cornwall, Cambridge, East Ferry, East Delavan, Ferry, Box, Dote, East Utica, or a Gateway, New Directions, and OCFS. I've spent over a decade talking to kids and families. I've helped plenty of teenagers turn their lives around. I've watched others go to jail. The ones I try not to think about are the ones whose stories ended in an obituary. Kids I talked to, kids I poured my heart into. There's nothing worse trying to pull someone towards life when they keep choosing a path that leads to death. I've been out here long enough before anyone knew my name. Across Buffalo and the nation, schools are facing a growing crisis: chronic absenteeism, disruptive behavior, declining academic performance, and a collapse in accountability. Poverty, trauma, and systemic inequality all play a role, but another truth is becoming harder to ignore. Discipline in the home is fading. This is where fatherhood matters, because many of the traits children need, structure, consistency, boundaries, accountability, traditionally come from fathers or father figures. When that presence is missing or inconsistent, the entire household feels it. Let me be direct. Absentee fathers are a major driver of this crisis. Too many men disappear when the relationship ends, disappear when responsibility gets uncomfortable, disappear when their child needs guidance instead of entertainment, show up only for birthdays and social media pictures, but vanish when it's time for homework, consequences, or hard conversations. Some think sending a cash app every now and then counts as parenting. It doesn't. Kids don't need part-time fathers. They need men who actually raise them. A core part of today's discipline problem begins with imbalance. A mother's instinct is wired for protection, shielding, comforting, and reducing distress. That instinct is essential, but when it dominates without balance, it can lead to avoiding conflict and protecting children from discomfort instead of preparing them for it. And that imbalance is why many relationships end in breakups or divorce, and why many children struggle today. When protection overrides accountability, the child becomes overshielded. An overshielded child becomes undisciplined. And an undisciplined child often ends up dead, in jail, or a burden to society. I've seen every one of those outcomes with my own eyes. Historically, fathers provided discipline, consequences, and structure. When that influence is absent or replaced with excuses, the household leans too heavily toward comfort and not enough towards accountability. And I'm not just talking about biological fathers, stepfathers, mentors, coaches, uncles, and grandfathers. They can all be father figures. Kids need that energy and presence. Meanwhile, many children spend hours on the phone, tablets, and gaming systems with little oversight. There is less reading, less studying, fewer chores, and fewer expectations. Parents negotiate instead of lead. Boundaries shrink, consequences disappear. Children receive more freedom than responsibility, more privileges than discipline. But discipline does not mean punishment. Discipline is structure. It is clarity. It is follow through. It is teaching children that obligations come before recreation. It shows them through adult behavior that responsibilities must be handled even when you're tired, stressed, or overwhelmed. Life becomes far less accommodating after childhood. Employers, landlords, banks, and courts do not negotiate with excuses. If parents do not teach accountability early, life will teach it later, and life's lessons are far harsher. Children need adults who lead, adults who enforce expectations, adults who teach basic life skills, cleaning, cooking, organization, time management, and require children to practice them. These are not optional skills. Life will demand them whether parents prepare their children or not. Many parents are exhausted, financially strained, and carrying their own trauma. Those realities deserve empathy, but structure is not an extra burden. It is the very thing that prevents chaos. Accountability creates stability. Discipline is an act of love, not control. If parents do not prepare their children for life, life will be forced to prepare them. And when life becomes the teacher, the consequences are far heavier. I've seen them. And that was written by Mark Talley, whose mother, Geraldine Talley, was one of 10 people shot to death by a white supremacist on May 14, 2022, is the author of 514, The Day the Devil Came to Buffalo. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, the next article by Lynn Schmidt. My daughter's life shouldn't depend on Miller's legal memo. My daughter has a life. That sentence should not be remarkable, but for most of America in history, it would have been. The Trump administration, it seems, would like to go back. My eldest daughter turned 25 in September. We had a St. Louis Cardinals-themed birthday party, chocolate cake, her favorite, and she stood at the counter and helped me frost it. She took enormous pride in that. She should. My daughter has Down syndrome. She lives in our community. Several days a week she volunteers. She has friends she makes plans with, a life with texture, routine, and meaning. She is a full person living a satisfying life. That is not an accident. It is the result of decades of advocacy, landmark law, and the simple moral premise that people with disabilities belong in this world. Recently, I learned that Stephen Miller, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, was the driving force behind a Justice Department memo that would dismantle the legal foundation of that premise. The memo issued June 18th argues that neither the Americans with Disability Act nor the Rehabilitation Act requires states to provide community-based services to people with disability. It takes direct aim at Olmstead versus LC, the 1999 Supreme Court decision that generations of families like mine have relied on, the ruling that said unnecessary institutional isolation is discrimination. Miller's memo argues that the court's holding was narrower than anyone understood and that what counts as adequate justification for institutionalization remains an open question. In plain language, it means states could stop funding the day programs, supported employment, home care, and community support that allow people like my daughter to live among us. It means the alternative, the institution, the place where people with disabilities were warehoused for most of American history in conditions documented to be cruel and sometimes fatal, becomes legally permissible again. The cruel irony is that community-based care costs Medicaid significantly less than institutional care. In 1999, the Supreme Court called unnecessary institutionalization what it is, discrimination. That finding did not require a constitutional amendment. It required decency. Justices appointed by presidents of both parties looked at the evidence of what institutions had done to human beings and said, not again. Miller looked at the same history and saw a matter of dispute. As of this writing, the memo has not been challenged in court because it isn't law. It is a legal opinion, and it cannot overturn a Supreme Court decision. Olmstead remains binding precedent. Courts are still required to honor it. The immediate danger is not a court ruling. It is silence. The Justice Department stepping back from its role as federal enforcer of Olmstead claims and leaving families to fight alone in courtrooms without the government on their side. There is also a case to watch. Texas and 8 other states are actively challenging the integration mandate in Texas versus Kennedy, arguing it is unconstitutional. The federal government has aligned itself with the plaintiffs. Disability advocacy organizations are mobilizing for litigation. Congressional Democrats have signaled interest in oversight hearings. The coming months will test how far this administration intends to push. My daughter will keep volunteering. She will keep showing up, doing work that matters, living her life among her neighbors, family, and friends. What is being tested is whether 50 years of hard-won freedom from institutions was a promise or just a pause. Okay, our next article by Froma Harrop is Are You Chasing False Gods? A small town reporter was wiser. My sadly departed friend Frank was a unicorn. He lived 89 years in the town he grew up in, a village on the Connecticut shore. A reporter at his local newspaper for over half a century, he had turned down offers to work for more glamorous publications, among them Sports Illustrated and the New York Times. Frank had considered the priesthood in his youth. He stopped going to church and claimed he wasn't part of it anymore, but the church's moral teachings clearly stayed put. Frank approached reporting as a kind of ministry, spending much time talking with his flock. He showered equal interest in the rich, the poor, the black, the white, the newcomers, and the old-timers. Frank stayed put in his weathered little house. The Rowayton of his youth was a modest place, inhabited by artists, teachers, and electricians. At a certain point, the hedge fund crowd decided it was their place. It had a beach on Long Island Sound and a New York commuter line. It was next door to the very affluent Darien, and it had little cottages that the finance bros could tear down and replace with suburban palaces. They bought the cottages from the older residents, forced out by rising real estate taxes. Frank became a kind of spiritual leader to the new super-rich neighbors. He felt zero envy of them. On the contrary, he keenly observed their discontent amid their plenty and diagnosed the reason. They are chasing false gods, he'd often say. The phrase relates to the Old Testament story of Moses descending Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, only to find the Israelites partying and worshiping gods of other people, Moloch, Baal, plus Aaron's golden calf. Hence the phrase golden calf means an idol people create when they lose faith. Note that the first commandment is, "Thou shalt not have no other gods before me." Frank was not necessarily attaching a religious meaning to the line. He interpreted chasing false gods as devoting one's life to ultimately unimportant things. Some of these false gods' fame, it does not make one safe. Pursuing youth, everyone who ages eventually loses it. Money, it doesn't prove your superiority or provide security against suffering. Frank recalls finding a young neighbor in his garage, hanging from a rope over his Ferrari. True story. F. Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby died in pursuit of false gods. He yearned for Daisy, not so much as a woman, but for the wealth and status she symbolized. Daisy was Gatsby's golden calf. Frank's presence preserved a desired vintage feel. He fit in with Rowayton's charming, if increasingly fancier, Wayne Street. He represented continuity for young men who holed up at home monitoring overnight trading on Asian markets. Frank was one of the town's remaining oaks. Basically, Frank just observed. Every morning he would see young women jogging behind baby carriages, ponytails bopping up and down. The older locals joked that the women were working out like hedge fund wives, lose their looks, and they'd be replaced with something younger and slimmer. A lot of that was going on. Rowayton is perched on the southwestern border of New England. Many residents fancying themselves upper class dressed with Yankee understatement. This was a place where quiet luxury hollered. Except for the cars, big, expensive German SUVs predominated. Frank died, his house was sold, and now there's a hulk built high to catch the water views. But the memory of Frank's life lessons go on. Whenever I chase false gods, and sadly I do sometimes, his voice comes rushing in and I reconsider. Next, we have institutional misstep. Buffalo State's behavior towards Birchfield Penny was misguided at best. There's a right way and a wrong way to go about professional administrative matters. And then there's what SUNY Buffalo State University did when it sought to remove Scott Propeak as executive director of the Birchfield Penny Arts Center. As reported by the news Matt Glynn, in late June, University President Bonita Durand, with no apparent advance notice or consultation with anyone at Birchfield Penny, sent a message to the Buffalo State community saying Propeak had been reassigned from his role as executive director. This indicates a troubling lack of sensitivity from Buffalo State to the major community asset that sits on its property. And it didn't go over well with the museum's Board of Trustees, which promptly asserted that the university was acting outside of its authority and declared Propeak was staying. Memo to Buffalo State: this isn't The Apprentice. While it's true that the university was at the time paying Propeak's salary, if leadership had any concerns about him, then the proper procedure would be to consult with the Board of Trustees, the body responsible for overseeing Propeak's performance. Of course, nobody is saying that there were ever any problems with that performance. Propeak has been executive director since 2023, but before that served the museum as associate director, chief curator, collections and exhibitions manager, and museum registrar. He has been a dedicated and enthusiastic representative of the museum since he was first hired in 1997. As then news reporter Mark Summer wrote, when Propeak was appointed interim director in 2021, the longtime employee had proved himself indispensable. As basically the only visible reason Buffalo State wanted to do without Propeak's services was the money it cost to pay him. But BPAC's Board of Trustees was willing to take over that responsibility. As Julia Norris, a spokesperson for the museum, said, the board's decision to retain Propeak also comes with a commitment to assume full responsibility for the executive director position going forward. The alacrity with which the board acted indicates that communication between university leadership and the board might have headed off this distressing and inappropriate episode. It's no secret that Buffalo State is running a fiscal deficit and needs to cut costs. It's also fair to say that reductions should be done thoughtfully and in consultation with those who will be affected by the cost cutting. As one of the SUNY system's rare urban campuses, the university should think carefully about assets that are as community-facing as this museum is. In addition to organizing exhibitions that feature Western New York treasures like Milton Rogovin, Haudenosaunee artist, and Carson Waterman, Julia Bottoms, and Robert Blair, as well as its ongoing explorations of Charles E. Birchfield, the Birchfield Penny frequently invites the public in for family-friendly celebrations, workshops, and educational programming. Its auditorium is routinely used by community groups. The Birchfield Penny is also the only local art museum certified as a sensory-inclusive certified venue, which means it is welcoming and comforting to neurodivergent patrons, a designation that includes autism. Founded in 1966, the museum celebrates its 60th anniversary this year. It has stated that it serves more than 55,000 patrons a year, holds work by more than 800 regional artists, and houses the world's largest public collection of Birchfield's work. But that's just the beginning of the Birchfield Penny's service to the Western New York community. In his interview with Summer, Popeek stated that most museums at any scale are trying to find and understand their connections to the community that they exist in. For us, it's part of our reason for existing. Those are the words of a leader who should be honored by the university, not disrespected. Let there be common sense, collegial discussions about how university resources should be allocated. The museum and Buffalo State can work together on this. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next we have Under My View by Joel Weiss of Clarence. Sometimes jokes don't clear the air. Comedian Brian Regan talks about the time he met a woman and asked her, "When is that baby due?" And as soon as he had said those words, he realized that she might not be pregnant. Once you utter something incredibly stupid, there's no turning back, ever. Back when I was principal of Clarence Middle School, our district had a relationship with a school district from Tianjin, China. As part of that relationship, from time to time, school officials and governmental leaders from Tianjin would visit Clarence to observe our education policies and procedures. One fine autumn day, we hosted about a dozen high-ranking visitors at our school. We knew that the Chinese culture emphasized proper protocol and perceived rank. To accommodate this, we arranged a receiving line of sorts for their arrival in the building. As a principal, I was first in line, followed by Assistant Principal Mr. White, then various department heads, guidance counselors, and secretaries. As our Chinese visitors entered the school, they too had arranged themselves according to perceived rank, with the highest ranking person at the beginning of the line. Their host and translator started to make introductions as their line prepared to meet us. Think of two teams lining up to shake hands at the conclusion of a Stanley Cup playoff series. The first two individuals from China both had the same name, Wang. The first two from Clarence had almost identical names, Weiss and White. Our names were similar, perhaps too similar. The introductions went something like this. Dr. Wang, this is Mr. White instead of Weiss. Then, because the second person was also Dr. Wang, he repeated the introduction. Not a huge mistake, especially consider many students and adults sometimes called us by the other's name. I had several good options. I could have gently corrected him and reminded him that I was Weiss, not White. I could have switched places with Mr. White, who was right behind me in the receiving line. I could have ignored the small error, which of course would have made great sense, but nope, I selected none of the above. Just like the comedian Reagan, I said something incredibly stupid, and immediately I knew I could never take it back. I quipped to the translator and our esteemed guest, "No, two Wangs don't make a White." The Clarence Middle School folks started giggling and laughing. They didn't mean to cause a scene or create an incident. The response was because what I blurted out was some would say witty, while most people would say incredibly dumb. Our Chinese visitors stopped shaking hands. They stopped smiling. Clearly, they were wondering why the American hosts were laughing and if we were laughing at them. I don't know for sure, but I assume it was very difficult to translate into Mandarin what I had said and why it resulted in the staff laughing. At some point, the guests from Tianjin moved on and probably chalked up Clarence Middle School's staff response to cultural differences. I greatly regret blurting out my statement without thinking. I did learn my lesson. Ever since that day, I have never asked a woman, "When is that baby due?" Never. Okay, next we have another voice, the military. Veterans lead the way in healing once more. By any honest measure, veterans have long been unintended pioneers in advancement of medicine. Modern triage systems emerged from battlefields where medical personnel had to decide in seconds who could be saved. Medevac transportation by helicopter increased survival rates in conflicts like Vietnam and later became a staple of civilian emergency medicine. Advances in trauma surgery, prosthetics, and rehabilitation medicine were accelerated because war left no alternative but to innovate. Today, veterans are once again on the front lines of an advance in medicine, this time involving psychedelics, as they search for ways to address the invisible wounds of war, post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, depression, and moral injury. I saw this firsthand at the Psychedelic Science 2025 conference in Denver, where thousands of researchers and policymakers gathered to explore the therapeutic potential of substances like psilocybin, MDMA, and ibogaine. Panel after panel featured former service members and their families speaking of journeys through plant medicine that help them process memories, reconnect, and rediscover purpose. The stories are deeply personal, but the larger theme is unmistakable. Veterans are once again walking point in a space that will eventually help the wider public. As author Michael Pollan observed while chronicling the modern psychedelic renaissance, these substances can allow people to see the mind from different vantage points. Unlike past medical breakthroughs, progress here will stall without public understanding, policy reform, and responsible investment. That's one reason DAV, Disabled American Veterans, recently launched Mindscapes, a new online multimedia resource that brings together the voices of veterans who have undergone plant medicine journeys alongside clinicians, researchers, and mental health professionals. Just as battlefield triage and medevac ultimately transformed emergency medicine, the knowledge veterans are helping generate today about psychedelic assisted therapies could expand how we understand healing itself. Veterans have once again stepped forward to lead. The question now is whether the rest of us are willing to follow. Okay, now we have some hints from Heloise, an idea for enlisting the help of children. Dear Heloise, I'm writing in response to Louis R.'s ideas on children's help in prepping and hosting, as well as your own inquiries on the topic. I have a 3-year-old daughter whom I've allowed to work alongside me on age-appropriate prep work in the kitchen, from just about the time she could stand herself up to reach the countertops in her toddler tower. Her great aunt gifted her a kid-friendly cutting board and a plastic but still functional knife set, and she can chop up just about every vegetable and fruit under the sun. She lends a hand in everything from daily meals to Christmas dinners, and now absolutely loves to be included in the prepping, cooking, setting up, and especially the decorating before any celebration. If there's a party at another family member's home, she asked if she can go over early to help. I believe that is truly instilled in her the selfless joy that can come from celebrating others, as well as the gratifying feeling of seeing others enjoy something that you've worked hard to put together. If you have the time and a fair amount of patience, I agree with Louis R. and recommend getting the little ones involved in these kind of activities. Next, we have awful waffle mistake. Dear Heloise, my waffle was stuck to the grid plates because I forgot to spray them. I had to wait for it to cool so that I could pick it clean and wash it. To make it more stressful, I had 2 young granddaughters who were waiting for their waffles. The drying of the grids would have taken forever, but I used my handheld hairdryer, which did an excellent job. It was much better than what I could have done by trying to dry each pocket. Egg cartons. Dear Heloise, in a recent column in the Winston-Salem Journal, Pat in New Jersey mentioned throwing out egg cartons. My wife and I have a small farm and keep about 40 free-range hens. They don't go in the hen house other than to lay eggs and roost at night. Otherwise, they roam around the farm as they wish. We donate our fresh eggs to a local food pantry. To date, we've given them several hundred dozen. Here's the thing. If you shop for egg cartons, you'll find that they can cost as much as $1.50 each. We try to purchase them in bulk, but even then the costs add up. We do get some freebies in returns, but not nearly enough to keep up with the hens. So there's always someone somewhere who can use an egg carton. That's from Chicken Man. Chicken Man, I use egg cartons as seed starters in the spring. My neighbor uses the egg cartons that she has to separate beads she uses in jewelry making. There are so many uses for egg cartons. Heloise. Into reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section and the Buffalo Next section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, and this is from the Buffalo Next section. Here's an article called Startups. Edenesque milks Buffalo for all it has to offer. Leslie Woodward had embraced all that Buffalo and upstate New York offers in the entrepreneurial community. Around 2 years ago, she brought her Hudson Valley plant-based dairy and food products startup Edenesque to Buffalo after vetting the area as a finalist for the Grow New York competition. In Buffalo, Woodward has made some important connections that have made sense financially and from a resource standpoint. She connected with venture development organization Launch New York and participated in the University of Buffalo's Cultivator Program for Startups. She also moved her business closer to its contract manufacturing and distribution partners after transitioning from self-manufacturing to co-manufacturing model. The Black woman-owned company has even hired a chief operational officer from Buffalo. Additionally, Woodward is in the midst of raising $1.6 million in funds as Edenesque becomes a startup that expects to become profitable in the near future. It's fair to assume that being in Buffalo has worked quite well so far for Woodward, a native of Detroit. She says it's been easy to feel connected to the area. I really like Buffalo, and I think some of the advantages of being here so far have been that a lot of our operations have been localized, said Woodward, a former chef in New York City and Paris. We get a lot of support from the Buffalo community. It's been unreal, she added. There's been mentorship and leadership programs. Most of our investment has come from Buffalo. We're really rooted. Buffalo has become an entrepreneurial town, and I think that helps too. Edenesque is an emerging brand in the Northeast that is starting to scale along the East Coast. Woodward hopes to eventually reach the Midwest and then expand nationally. She's now hit some key revenue milestone, allowing for the expanding footprint, and is pushing the startup forward as a branded food company and not just a plant-based milk company. However, it is Edenesque's popular barista blend pistachio milk that has become a sought-after item. The product frequently sells out online and in retail locations, including the shelves of Whole Foods Market. It's been significant in market validation, Woodward said. Edenesque is known best for its environment-conscious almond and oat milks that are gluten-free, vegan, and bring a combination of nutrient density, and flavor with no thickeners or stabilizers. The company's products have also been sold in stores throughout Brooklyn and Manhattan, and in corporate offices such as Calvin Klein and Estee Lauder, as well as restaurants and cafes in New York City. It means the brand is resonating in the marketplace, said Woodward, who founded the company in 2014. We haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what is possible. What I do know is that the customer and consumer enjoy our product, and with the demand for the product, it is really exciting to see. Woodward, who worked in tourism, transitioned into becoming a chef for 20 years, starting a boutique catering business in New York City and serving as executive chef for the president of Columbia University, where she learned more about how food impacts communities. She also started a cold-pressed juice business before beginning the effort to get Eat and Escape going. Woodward bootstrapped the company, bringing the products she made to a number of farmers markets and then self-manufacturing the products in Kingston. In 2023, she transitioned to co-manufacturing model, where the brand retains ownership of the recipe or design, while the partner handles the production, labor, and quality control. Edenesque worked with Cornell Agritech to conduct the initial bench trial, and those results went to Steuben Foods, which became Woodward's contract manufacturing partner. As a finalist for Grow New York, Woodward began scouting a number of regions around the state to relocate, and Buffalo stood out. When Edenesque moved to Western New York, it got closer to Steuben Foods in Elma and its main distribution and warehousing partner, Sonwill Distribution in West Seneca. Based on increasing demand for the product, Edenesque decided last year to shift to a new fulfillment partner in Remix Logistics in Buffalo, which handles direct-to-consumer fulfillment initiatives. Woodward also wanted to be considered for investment from Launch New York, which has residential requirements for companies to live in upstate. Launch New York wound up investing $175,000 in Edenesque. The UB Cultivator program also requires companies to reside in Western New York. Edenesque graduated last year from UB Cultivator, which includes mentorship, hands-on knowledge and experience, and $100,000 in pre-seed funding, money critical to a growing startup. The infrastructure for the company was already set up, so Woodward did not have to build anything in Buffalo, making the transition easier. More recently, she also hired Peter Eck from Buffalo as Edenesque's COO to help scale its commercial business. Edenesque is also expanding into more restaurants and workplaces, including some in Western New York. When Edenesque moved to Western New York, Marnie Lavigny, president and CEO of Launch New York, said, "This is a huge win for our region, as it will bring high-quality jobs to Buffalo, increase its diversity of startup founders, and support a health-conscious product that is good for our bodies and the environment." So far, Woodward has closed on about $950,000 as part of a current raise. Her goal is to bring in $1.6 million, and she continues to work on that effort as Edenesque transitions to a company that has the potential to become profitable. She's made sacrifices to continue what she considers a regenerative business that prioritizes the community. We're in a good place where we've been able to have turned the corner, stabilize, and be able to scale to that next level, said Woodward, who recently named a Tory Burch Foundation Fellow, which will support 120 selected women business owners through access to strategic community and expert resources. We have withstood tougher times, taken those risks and not given up, and now we're getting to the point where the company is stabilizing. But it took a lot to get here, she added. Woodward has been focused on self-awareness, grit, fortitude, and a willingness to take risks to move forward as a startup, the majority of which wind up failing. As a founder and CEO, it is important to have as many resources as possible, whether they're mentors, advertisers, or people you can call on. She said, we're so often so siloed, so when you are fundraising or have a question, it's great to have a community to ask and lean on during tougher times. And next we have smaller pool of workers keeps cap on unemployment. There has been a golden age of low unemployment in the Buffalo-Niagara region. The local jobless rate has topped 5% for only 1 month since the summer of 2021, a period of nearly 5 years. And for most of the time, unemployment has been in the 3% to low 4% range. That is level that economists consider to be close to or at full employment. And the good news continued in May, with the state labor department reporting that the region's jobless rates ticked up to 4.2% from 4.1% in April. While that was higher than the 3.4% in May 2025, it was still low by local historical standards and a strong sign that the region's job market is on solid footing. If a worker wants to find a job, the quality and pay notwithstanding, there's an excellent chance that they can find one. And it is a sign that the local job market is fairly balanced, with the supply of available workers roughly in line with the demand at the time when hiring has stalled out across the region since late last summer, and many businesses have taken a no hire, no fire approach. But there is another reason why jobless levels have stayed low, and that is the shrinking supply of workers. It tumbled during COVID-19 pandemic, when waves of workers took early retirement during the lockdown, and it has not recovered since. The region has about 5,000 fewer workers today than it did before the pandemic. That is a function of those retirements, as well as the region's modestly shrinking and aging population, which isn't adding new, younger workers as fast as the older ones head into retirement. Okay, that's it for today. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 12, 2026 issue of the Viewpoints and Buffalo Next sections of the Buffalo News. We read from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News every Sunday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Karen. Thank you very much for listening. Take good care of yourself and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the National Enquirer. At 8 p.m., we have People Magazine. And at 9 o'clock, we have the New York Times Book Review. Stay tuned for these readings and more. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, please stay with us. If you're listening to this publication online, you're probably using our website, a podcast player like Spotify or iTunes, a streaming service like Siro, or a smart speaker. Did you know that we now have a dedicated app that can be downloaded to any mobile device, like a smartphone or tablet, for free? App users can conveniently access our live stream and any episode of our podcast easier than ever. To download the app, just type NFRRS in the search window in the Apple App Store or in the Google Play Store. Contact us anytime if you have any questions by calling 716-821-5555, extension 5. Thank you. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Debbie, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 13th issue of the National Enquirer on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our headlines of this issue is Explosive Royal Reunion. The King Cuts Harry Out of the Will. Okay.
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes